3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space.
We'll stop Discovery. Welcome back. Houston, we've got a good picture of Steve.
Greetings, everyone. Happy National Coaches Day. I'm astronaut Steve Smith. I'm so thankful that you're spending some of your day with us. For all of you coaches, a big shout out for what you do. Some of you are coaches in athletic endeavors. Others are teachers. And also many of us are serving as coaches in our other roles during this COVID period, such as teaching our nieces and nephews, our children, and our grandchildren. So many thanks to all of you. I think it's important always to remember too that NASA and all of you that coach really have one common goal in mind that's just shared, and that's to make people's lives better. That's what NASA does, and as coaches, that's what all of you do. And so be proud of that, and the rest of us are very thankful for what you're doing. So please remember that. Now, flying in space was an incredible opportunity, and I'm going to take you along today and show you what it was like. I want you to understand what it's like to ride this fire-breathing dragon into space, what it's like to finally reach zero gravity. It's an incredibly strange life. And then what it's like to actually be allowed to go outside the spaceship to fix things like the Hubble Space Telescope. I think you'll find it incredibly interesting and memorable. Now, what I'll do is I'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some questions and answers. One of the main themes that I have today, though, is not only that coaches should use certain techniques to relay information and skills to their listeners, but also that if you're on the other side of the equation and you're being coached by someone, you also have to have a set of skills to be receptive to what they're saying and to get the most out of what they're saying. There are some shared skills that go between the two, and one is gratitude. And so at this moment, I just want to encourage you to be grateful for what the other party is doing for you. And today in particular, I want to thank Unified Space Agency and Annie and Michelle for organizing this. During today's presentation, I'd like you to think about the following proposal. If we were to give you a free ticket, and of course we don't actually have these because they'd be very expensive, but if we were to give you a free ticket that you would be obligated to use 1 month from today, and that ticket was for a rocket ship ride to the space station for about a 2-week stay, would you accept that ticket? It should generate some interesting conversations at home tonight. You may change your mind during the presentation, either one way or the other, after you hear some of the details. So anyway, ponder that during our presentation today. Now, the man in the gold mask here is incredibly happy at this moment. I have a gigantic smile on my face, and that's because I had just finished successfully fixing the Hubble Space Telescope. You can imagine what a huge sense of relief it was to not damage the telescope. In fact, just before I left on that flight, I was told the telescope was worth $6 million. So that added quite a bit of pressure to the flight. But in any case, I had just finished my very first spacewalk, so I was incredibly happy. Now, even though this looks like a peaceful, joyful moment, constant diligence is required. A constant awareness to any new changes or dangers that appear is required. And the constant ability to come up with a creative solution and to actually act on that solution. It's somewhat like the growth mindset. And the reason that those attributes are required is because this is an incredibly dangerous moment. I'm wearing that spacesuit because there's no air outside. That spacesuit provides the oxygen. And speaking of the oxygen, it's kept in that suit by a bladder material, a layer of material that's just 4 millimeters thick. It's very thin. During this flight, I received the equivalent of about 275 chest x-rays worth of radiation. When you go away from the face of the Earth, you receive more radiation. And we're traveling at 17,500 miles an hour. That's about 5 miles per second, about 7 to 8 times the speed of a bullet. So this is a very dangerous moment. This environment is complicated, it's fast-paced, and it's always changing, it's dynamic. We also have schedule constraints. We have resource constraints. We have many people who are watching us. We call them stakeholders, very interested in how we're doing. And believe it or not, in the space program, we also have competition, both foreign and domestic. Now, if those characteristics that describe this environment sound familiar, it's because they also describe your environment in your life. It's complicated, it's fast-paced, it's dynamic. You have resource constraints, time constraints, you have stakeholders, and you have competition. The reason I mention that is because the techniques that we learn from coaches during our life, both as children and then as astronauts, those techniques, and also the techniques we use to be effective team players and performing successfully teamwork, those techniques that we use are applicable to your life. So that's why I think you'll find them interesting and helpful. Now, we call it the explorer's mindset. It's this mindset that we use to achieve big things and to be dynamic along the way as different challenges pop up. But you might also know it as a mindset of a go-getter or a high achiever or a trendsetter or a pathfinder. It doesn't matter what you call it. The main point is that this mindset is extremely helpful in achieving big things in your life and being happy along the way. So I hope that you'll enjoy that. And it's not that it's hard to reach or hard to implement. It's actually very accessible. So I think you'll find immediately after our event today that it's accessible and that it will benefit your life. Now, let's move on here. So what was my path to that moment? Well, it started in sports. Here I was playing baseball. Here I am with Coach Rinaldi. I'm standing right next to him there. So here we are at the Expos. And so along my pathway to that moment with Hubble, I was constantly being coached along the way. And so I was gathering these skills along the way. I call it a quiver of skills that I was collecting along the way. And each coach would contribute to that. So Coach Rinaldi, for example, he was very, very good at teaching us baseball skills, but also life skills. He taught us to love what you're doing and only participate in things that bring you true joy. He taught us to respect the sport that you are in. In other words, provide dignity to the opposing team, whether you win or lose, and to play fairly and to do it with joy. He also taught us how to be good winners and good losers. So Coach Rinaldi really taught me kind of the background part. It's the effort to make yourself better, to enjoy what you're doing, and to have respect for the competition. He also would give advice in a very reassuring way. So he might criticize something you do, but then he would make a positive comment too. And that was his way of keeping our emotional fuel tank full, keeping us full of spirit and joy along the way. So not only did I play baseball, but I also swam. I'm not going to show you a picture of me in a swimsuit. So here's after a swim meet. I did have the chance to swim overseas because we lived overseas, and also in meets in America. In the swimming world, I had two coaches. One was my club coach, Jerry Macedo. And in the school side of things, my coach was Norm Ornloff. Jerry and Norm taught me more skills to add to the ones that Coach Rinaldi had given me. In the sport of swimming, for example, they showed me how sacrifice and hard work pays off. They showed me how to set goals and to work diligently to them. And in fact, they taught me to set really audacious goals, not just small increments, but really thinking big. And I'm so grateful for this extra skills that they brought into me. The other thing they taught me is how to overcome disappointment, especially in individual sports like swimming. You don't always swim your best time. So when I was disappointed by something, they gave me that life skill to overcome disappointment. When I went into high school, I picked up a couple other sports. I played basketball and water polo. It's a sport that we have here in the Western United States. So that's me on the left, number 24, in those very short shorts that were in style at the time. And then on the right, they're playing this sport called water polo. Now, my coach in basketball was Coach Scott, and my coach in water polo was Coach Wright. And they, again, added more skills, not only in the two sports, but also life skills to my quiver that I was collecting along the way in my life. And so, for example, they taught me to be a really good communicator in this setting. They taught me to be a good team player in this setting. They also taught us how to, again, show dignity and respect for the opposing team. They also showed me how to make decisions under pressure and in a short amount of span of time. And of course, these sports where you're using a ball and you have nets on both on the end, you're always watching what the opponents are doing and have to make quick decisions. And so they taught me how to do that and how to analyze all the different options. So again, we're adding skills to the quiver here. The next step I took was to go on to college and play water polo at Stanford. They had just won the NCAA championships my senior year, so I was thrilled to join them. And here I was coached by Dante Dettamonte. And what Dante did is he took all those skills that we brought from all the previous coaches and really kind of polished all of them, because this is a very intense level of competition. So continue to emphasize to be joyful. Continue to emphasize to have dignity for the other teams. Continue to teach me, of course, the skills within this sport, but also to continue to seek these high goals, not just small goals, but big, audacious goals. And most important, along the path to those goals, what do you do when bad things happen? When you're disappointed by something? For example, in water polo, you might lose a game, you might be injured, you might make a mistake that brings embarrassment to you or to the team or to your family. And so these things, when you're chasing audacious goals, happen. And I'm so thankful that I had coaches that used all of these techniques to teach me how to keep moving forward. What they taught me is to have this open mindset, to think creatively on how I can move forward, and to not hesitate when these bad things happen. You know, you never want to turn around from chasing these audacious goals when bad things happen. That would be the worst thing you could do. You want to move forward in a timely manner using some really creative, open mind. And so I've arrived at this point in my life where I had these coaches that were athletic coaches adding to my skill set. But we know that there's other types of coaches in our lives too. And so it can be teachers, for example, that are teaching you math or music or science. And of course, there's friends. Dozens and dozens and dozens of coaches appear in your life, maybe without you even realizing it, but you are learning something from every single one of them. They are teaching you things. You're watching how they make decisions. You're looking at what their brand is. You're looking at what choices they make, what choices they don't make. And so you almost subconsciously are watching them and learning from them as coaches. And I'm forever grateful to the dozens and dozens of friends who have helped me along the way make it to my audacious goal. And if any of them are listening today, great gratitude. Thank you so much. There's also, of course, your family. And so this picture on the left is a painting that hangs at my parents' house. I do have one sibling, Paula. She's older than I am. This is a painting from the 1960s. I don't wear those kind of bow ties anymore. Don't worry about that. But in any case, Paula was a coach for me as an older sibling. And the one skill that she really taught me that I wanted to mention today is she taught me to think really, really, really big. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And on the right are my parents who met as 8-year-olds and were married over 70 years. And they taught me, of course, dozens and dozens of things as a coach, a life coach. But the one that I will always remember the most is the true value of humble hard work, to just grind it through, to never be the victim and just keep grinding and grinding and grinding through. And for that, I'm also very grateful. Now, I have to admit, celebrities were also kind of coaches for me along the way. I did have my sports heroes, Willie Mays on the left from the San Francisco Giants, Lou Alcindor, number 33 there with the Milwaukee Bucks. He later became, of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And on the right, Mark Spitz, the swimmer who won 7 gold medals at the Munich Olympics. And so I had many sports heroes, but these were the three that I really followed the most. And I was, of course, so impressed with the attitude they took towards achieving high things, but they were very humble along the way and very kind people. And to this day, to a man, these three are still like that. And so I'm so thankful to have had their influence. By the way, Willie Mays wore number 24 with the San Francisco Giants. And you may remember back from that high school picture of me playing basketball and then the one of me playing water polo, I wore number 24 in honor of Willie Mays. And so I also had other heroes in my life. And of course, it was the explorers. And these are the ones that really influenced my career choice. One thing I did want to mention at this point is that I keep talking about audacious goals. And the goal I'll be talking about today is this long-term one that took years and actually decades for me to achieve. But this mindset of seeking these big goals is something that we want you to apply in your daily life. Maybe it's a goal that's a day from now, a week from now, a month from now, or even longer. And so this big thinking is something we really want to incorporate into our daily lives. So I was impressed with explorers who would climb mountains, explore rivers, explore the ocean, jungles, the Arctic, and of course, fly into space with Jan and Mae Jemison there in the middle picture. One of the common traits they have is they look for these gigantic goals. They're not looking for little itsy bitsy incremental goals. They're looking for big things. They want to go places where people haven't been before and discover things there. And so that's this audacious mindset that I had gotten from my coaches and now from the explorers that I was following. And in fact, they served as coaches to me. They look for these audacious goals and they are sure they're going to make them happen. So to be specific, I followed two explorers in particular. One was Jacques Cousteau, who was the first one to invent scuba diving. You can see his old uniform there from the old days. And so he was, of course, exploring the inner ocean, and I was watching his television every week. But the second one was the astronauts as a group. And so I was reading magazines, following them on their television events, going to the library and reading books, and collecting pictures like the one on the right from NASA. Now, that picture on the right is of Ed White in the summer of 1965 doing America's very first spacewalk. And I can tell you that of all the different skills and all the different activities that the explorers were going for, that one seemed particularly exciting to me, so much so that I reflected it in drawings. So this is a picture from the summer of 1965 on the left that I drew. You can see I'm ready to do a spacewalk, even during the launch. That's not exactly the best time to go outside. You should wait until the rockets, the engines turn off. But in any case, you can see I've pictured myself outside the spaceship. At this point, I've got my big red wrench ready to go. Before I actually ended up doing spacewalks decades later, I did wait until the engines stopped. And then on the right is a really interesting picture also from the summer of 1965. It's from Disneyland in Los Angeles. My parents wanted to encourage, as one of my coaches, my big dreams. And so they took us to Disneyland because there was a section there called Tomorrowland, where you could pretend you were living in the future in a space society. And so if you look over my left shoulder, for example, you see one of those spaceship rides that goes in a circle. And as my sister Paul and I were walking around, my gosh, I met my very first astronaut. There he is in his shiny silver uniform. He appeared to be like 7 feet tall. I was incredibly thrilled to meet him. You can tell by my posture, which is pretty unusual for a 7-year-old to take when their dad asks them to pose for a picture. You can see I'm very, very excited about meeting my first astronaut. I think I was also maybe a little bit scared. You can see I've left a little bit of a safety zone between the astronaut and myself. But to this day, I remember thinking he's also an incredibly cool astronaut. It's the only astronaut I've ever met that wears his sunglasses inside of his helmet. The girl on the left is, as I said, my sister, and she's about 4 years older than I am. And so at this point, I have already figured out this audacious goal of being an astronaut. Actually, she had an audacious goal at this point too. She used to watch all kinds of law enforcement and lawyer type shows on television, like a show called Perry Mason. So she wanted to be a law enforcement officer, which is pretty audacious for a girl in the 1960s. Well, she had good coaching from many people and knew what path to take. And she put in the hard, humble effort. And she became one of America's first women FBI agents and served in that role for 25 years. So I'm very thankful for her influence on me, as you may recall, as being such a great coach for me. Now, as the years passed from this picture until I became of age to go to college, I was pursuing thoughts on how to become a pilot and how to become an astronaut. I learned that all of the astronauts were in the military, 100% of them. So I decided that when I got to my junior year in high school, I would apply to the United States Air Force Academy because it was the next logical step to become an astronaut. So I did that, but I did get bad news from them. That's what this big red X stands for. They did not want me. And I had some surgery as a younger child that disqualified me. So my dreams were kind of shattered there, but not for long. And so that's one of these things that coaches had taught me through sports is that when bad things happen, you can't dwell on them. You've got to kind of put them behind you, just move them behind and keep moving forward with some new idea, some new creative idea. And so I did go home from the interview, flight medical exam, from which I got disqualified. And, I had a good cry with my parents that night, but you might be surprised to know that the very next day I was over it and coming up with a new plan. And so I knew that there was a university near me that had a good engineering school. They also had an airport and they also had a flying club. So it was a perfect place to go to get an engineering degree and learn to be a pilot, with the hopes that someday maybe NASA would take non-military pilots. And actually, that's exactly what happened while I was in college. So I attended Stanford, got some engineering degrees, got my pilot's license, and then started working for IBM, all with this goal of becoming an astronaut. Well, eventually I met the minimum requirements to apply. And remember, now they were taking civilian pilots. So I applied to NASA and they rejected me. Again, it was devastating just for a day, because I knew that it was a long-term goal, and that through all these wonderful coaches, that I had this skill set, this life skill set that gave me the resilience and what they call nowadays grit to keep going. And I have to say that skill set was very valuable, because NASA didn't reject me just once or twice or 3 times, but 4 times over the next 10-year period approximately. So now I've got the Air Force rejection, and I've got 4 NASA rejections too. And of course, in these letters, they don't tell you why you're not being selected. They just say, we don't want you. And so you have to figure out kind of on your own what to do. But again, when you have this dream in your mind that Coach Rinaldi told me to seek, find what brings you joy, because if you find something that brings you joy and do it every day, it won't even seem like work. And so you're looking for what this joyful thing will be. Some people find it at an early age. Others don't. They take some into their teens or 20s or 30s or 40s. So just keep looking for it. If you're a young person listening today, find what makes you joyful. And what you're looking for is the smile that you see on my face here. This is a picture I drew probably as an 8 or 9-year-old. Began doing a spacewalk during the launch with red shoes. I can't explain the red shoes either, but look at the smile on my face. You're looking for this thing that makes you joyful. And this is what drives this resilience and perseverance that you learn through coaches to keep moving forward. And so that's what I did. I came up with very specific plans on how to move forward. This is when I'm in my 20s now. We didn't have software at the time to draw a schedule, so it's done by hand, but it's got important events and kind of strategies on what to do and where to work and what skills to get. And then I was working very hard on building up these other skills that would make me a good astronaut. So for example, I found books that were on the subject. They actually had a book about the astronaut selection program. I was building my skills like flying, and I was consulting with people who could give me good advice. So on the right is one of my IBM managers, Ray Abazayed. And I had the idea, why don't I just write the astronauts and see if they have any advice? And so that's a copy of a letter that I wrote to Dr. Sally Ride, and she wrote me back with advice. And so you're trying to be creative along the way to keep the dream moving forward. Things that you've learned from those coaches. It did turn out well for me. On the 5th opportunity, I was finally selected. The picture I'm going to show you in the next slide is taken about 72 hours after I was selected as an astronaut. I was an engineer at NASA, and the public affairs folks said, why don't you come over to one of the simulators and we'll take a picture of you that we'll put in your hometown newspaper. So this is the smile that you have on your face after trying to get something for 31 years. I'm in the simulator there at NASA. Now, I was going to edit out the part at the bottom, because this is the picture that's at my parents' house where I expressed gratitude to them. And I thought, I'm going to leave it in there, because you'll remember when I talked about Annie and Michelle at the beginning, I said, regardless of whether you're a coach or being coached, gratitude is one of these assets and one of these skills that you need to have along the way. And so this was my picture that I sent to my parents, just thanking them so much for helping me make it. And so I had finally become one of these professional explorers. These are really the 6 key explorers that influenced me: Neil Armstrong, Charles Lindbergh, Sally Ride. Across the bottom is Amelia Earhart, Jacques Cousteau from France, and Edmund Hillary from New Zealand. And so in wanting to be explorers, I was actually kind of using their mindset. It was being provided by coaches that are in athletics, by teachers in all my different subjects, by my friends, by my family. So they were teaching me this whole set of skills that allowed me to become an individual that could get this pretty difficult job and do a good job at it. Now, that's how we work on the individual. Let's now talk a little bit about what it's like to fly in space. I'd be a little remiss not to do that. And then we'll talk about teamwork. This is awesome. This is the launch into space from Florida. It's 8.5 minutes of violent motion, massive acceleration, but also massive joy because we're so happy to be in there. In terms of the acceleration, we go from the launch pad to Mach 25 in 8.5 minutes. That's 17,500 miles an hour. And because we're going so fast, so quickly, we receive a lot of G forces, gravitational forces. So I weighed about 3 times my normal weight on the way into space, so over 600 pounds. And it's massive vibration because of all the power behind that. There's about 88 million horsepower of equivalent horsepower back there. It's an amazing ride. And so it's like being on a really long, really good roller coaster for a long time. You're kind of being violently thrown left to right, forward and back and up and down. It's actually hard to read computer screens if they're in front of you because they're kind of jumping around. But as I said before, there's also massive joy inside. Again, anytime you have these audacious goals and they come true, wow, it's really an incredible feeling. And I was so happy at this point. I also will tell you that there's no fear. One of the reasons is that because we had prepared meticulously. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. Of course, we're always so happy to be there finally. But I will say that between 3 and 6 miles away, all my friends and all my family are watching this thing go up into space, and they're a little bit nervous. And so they really carry the burden of the drama and also, of course, the burden if something bad happens. And for that reason, they're really the heroes of the space program in my mind. And so 8.5 minutes later, we're in space. It's magical. People always ask, what's it like? It's really easy for me to answer. It's like this magical show. It's like a TV movie. All of a sudden, I'm floating in my room. You can imagine in the place that you are right now, just look up at the ceiling. I mean, it'd just be so bizarre if you started floating up there. You can see me here floating in the space station. Of course, we don't wear shoes because we don't really walk around the space station or the space shuttle. That's why you see me with socks. And we're, of course, floating because we're constantly falling. We're moving at 17,500 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. And because we're moving so fast, we go around the world in 90 minutes. So we go around the Earth 16 times every 24-hour day, which means that we see the sunrise and the sunset 16 times every day. The sun goes up and then down, up and down, up and down. It's very confusing. It's very bizarre. It's so confusing that astronauts generally wear 2 watches. So that's why I have 2 watches on in this picture. One watch we keep on the time where our family is. So that was the black watch I had set on Texas time where Peggy and the kids were. And then the gold and silver watch was on mission elapsed time. It's basically at 0 when you launch and then starts moving forward. A couple of strange things happen in space since there's no gravity and you're just kind of just floating around the room. Again, you could travel from one side of the room to the other that you're in now just by touching the wall, and you would just kind of fly over there. Well, the things inside of your body are floating around too, and they're not used to that, including the fluid inside your ears. So getting sick in space is actually pretty common. It usually goes away after a couple days, but I can tell you that 93 minutes into my first flight, I threw up for the first time and probably threw up about 100 times on my 4 flights. So for those of you who are pondering that question about whether you want to go into space or not, that's something to consider. I will tell you that you get better again after a day or two, and it's entirely worth it in my mind. The other strange thing that happens is you grow in space. There's no gravity, so your spine actually elongates. So usually you grow about 1 to 2 inches. It does return to your normal height when you come back to Earth because it recompresses. But for that time in space, you're actually taller. We do measure every person's height to document their height growth so that on their future flights, we know how to exactly size the spacesuits that they'll use if they spacewalk. And so we measure people. Now, when we measure people in space, we could have them float up to a wall and we could put their feet on the wall and then mark where their head is, but that's not very much fun. So we usually measure people upside down. We have them float over, we put their head on the floor and then mark where their feet are. So this is Joe Tanner and Scott Horowitz measuring Steve Hawley here. You see he has his head on the ground there. And on the right is just a demonstration of how bizarre it is to sleep in space. We have Velcro on our sleeping bags and Velcro on the wall and the ceiling, so you can sleep wherever you want. I always slept on the wall or the ceiling. It didn't make any sense to me to sleep on the floor because you could do that on Earth. it's pretty bizarre because when there's no gravity, you're kind of floating inside of your sleeping bag all night, which is kind of disturbing. It's kind of like being in a cocoon. And also, if you don't put your arms inside the sleeping bag or inside the sleeping seat belts, your arms will float all night, which is very bizarre. It's strange to see your hands kind of passing in front of your face in the middle of the night. So I always put my arms inside my sleeping bag. The other thing that will float around all night, if you don't worry about it or think about it, is your head. There's no, Velcro on the back of your head to Velcro your head to the pillow. So you'll notice there's a seatbelt that goes across my head. So that's what it's like to sleep in space. The first couple of nights is kind of tough because you're so excited, but eventually you do get used to it and you sleep better. Now, my favorite thing to do, and kind of what my expertise was to go outside of the spaceship wearing this white spacesuit to fix things. So here I'm fixing the Hubble Space Telescope. This box weighs about 800 pounds on Earth. Of course, in space, it's just floating there in front of my face. Doesn't weigh anything. And so my job is to take this box. This is the new box that we're putting into the Space Telescope. We've already taken the old one out. Now, to practice things like this takes huge teamwork. So we'll start to transition a little bit to that subject, and also huge preparation, because you really have to be so careful because it's so dangerous and there's so many expensive things involved. Now, there's no place on Earth where we have zero gravity, which is unfortunate because you want to practice these spacewalks as a team before you actually have to do them. So we do it in a pool. So we have a giant pool in Houston, Texas. It's 16 million gallons, about 40 feet deep. And we put pretend spaceships like the Hubble Space Telescope on the right there into the water. And then we put pretend white spacesuits on and go into the water and practice the spacewalks over and over and over and over again, just like you're taught by your coaches, regardless of whether in sports or music, et cetera. That meticulous preparation always removes your anxiety from what you're doing and improves your performance if you've practiced over and over and over again. Now, a couple of things that are not accurate, though, when you practice in the water or spacewalk is all these scuba divers won't be there in space. So when you go outside in space, there's no one else out there except your spacewalking buddy. And the other thing is there's still gravity in that pool. So if you're doing something upside down in the pool, you will feel the blood rush to your head, and it's pretty painful. So you might do a task for a half hour and it's kind of painful to do. But in space, there's no gravity. And of course, we also take advantage of virtual reality. And so again, we were trying to get ready to go before we go. I had never seen the Hubble Space Telescope before I went and actually fixed it. So we have this one that's in the pool. We also use virtual reality. On the left, you can see we have the special goggles on. We have special gloves with sensor. And what we would see in our eyes is what you see on the right there. So this is a spacewalk on the space station. So there you can see there's actually a fake space station there, and there's the two of us doing our spacewalk. So we practice in the pool and in the virtual reality. These simulators are run by instructors, which are independent. We spend about 80% of our time in these simulators practicing bad things. So very rarely do we go into a simulator and just kind of practice the normal plan. These simulators are run by these instructors who have computer inputs that they can make to make bad things happen in the simulator, so they see how we react, to make sure that we've thought through all the bad things that can happen and how we're going to react. And because they're always making our life tough, we actually call them the evil instructors. So the evil instructors are the guys and girls who run those simulators. And of course, the purpose is to get the whole team together, not just the astronauts, but also mission control, working together so that we can actually do something like this. Here I am servicing the Hubble Space Telescope as we fly over Australia. You'll notice off the side of my suit is a cable. That's in case I accidentally lose my grip and start to float away. I can use that cable to pull myself back. The suit has 14 layers of material. One of them is Kevlar to keep us safe from high-speed particles. It does, of course, have oxygen in the backpack. It does not have food inside because it'd be difficult to eat it. We can't, of course, take the helmet off during the spacewalk. There's no air out there. We do have a drink bag that's inside the spacesuit. The straw is located right by our mouth. If we need to take a drink during the spacewalk, we just take a drink like that. We can't open the visor and take a drink bag and drink. So we have to keep the visor closed, and we have the drink bag inside. One of the interesting things during a spacewalk is your nose itches, and it's a kind of a psychological thing because you can't actually reach your nose. Of course, again, we can't hold our breath, open the visor and itch our nose and close the visor. You can't, pull your arm up inside your sleeve, come up and itch your nose, and then put your arm back into the sleeve. It's too tight. And so the way they resolve that is they put two white foam pads inside the helmet. They're right here by our face. And anytime if your nose itches during the spacewalk, you just kind of go like that. And you can imagine we have to think about going to the bathroom. We cannot come inside to take the suit off and go to the bathroom and go back outside, because that process would take about 2 hours. So we go to the bathroom before we do the spacewalk, and then we wear diapers during the spacewalk. So again, more information for you if you're thinking about becoming an astronaut. Let's talk about teamwork now. So the people in the blue shirts in this picture are the EVO instructors we had. And the orange suited people are, of course, the crew for this particular flight. And what I want to tell you about teamwork at NASA, it's extreme teaming. It's extreme teaming. And that's because we're doing, well, very dangerous things, right? So we're very meticulous in our preparation, and we really try and build the team together. It's the same thing that the coaches in my life have done in their different fields. Here, it's just to a real extreme. One of the things that makes NASA teams so successful is we become very close to our teammates, not just at work, but also in life. So it's really a social environment. People who work at NASA typically, even after work is over, will go out together for a beverage or an ice cream or a coffee. They spend time together on sports teams and also on weekend events and at important events for their friends within the space program, for their families. And so we really becomes really socially close to each other. And the reason that's important is in our business, being close to your teammates, where you really start to learn about them, you can anticipate their thoughts and their activities, makes you much more efficient in good times and much more resilient in bad times. And so when we've had bad things happen at NASA, we work very effectively together and are very resilient because we're almost like a family. So even the EVO instructors are friends in my mind. So this is a picture of the team at the pool. And again, it's showing you that the space program's not just about the astronauts. There we are standing in the front row. A couple of the people have the suits on ready to get in the water. The rest of us have white shirts on. But look at the giant team that's involved. It's a huge team. And so it's always been uncomfortable for me to get so much attention as the astronaut because I'm doing very little of the work. The big team is doing the work. And these are really talented, technical people, but also incredibly humble. That's the type of person we look for, that type of person that's really sharp, but has good people skills and are humble, because in our business, it's so dangerous. We really have no place for someone that's has a big ego. And so another attribute of good teamwork in our place. The other thing I'll mention is this giving culture. People that work at NASA are typically givers. That means they give accolades, they give help, they give instructions. They're always trying to give something before they return something. They're not looking for something in return. They're not waiting for something in return. So this is the concept of having a team of givers rather than takers. Takers are people that are waiting to get something first or expecting something in return. And so it's the same thing that my coaches have taught me all along, and that's to love your teammates, to work with them, to be generous to them and helping them, not expecting something in return. So Adam Grant, who's very popular on the internet, he's a professor up in Illinois at the business school there, talks a lot about giving culture. And if you have a giving culture, it's much more effective team. So that's another attribute of the NASA teams. Mission Control is probably the single best example of teamwork at NASA. It's a famous place. And the reason it works so well is because it has its leaders, its coaches have enabled kind of three big attributes. The first is each person knows what their job is. They've been assigned their job. It may sound like coaches you've seen in athletics, for example. You know what your job is. The second thing is each person is taught to really own their job, to be super, super, super clear that that is their job, that they are proud to do it. And if they don't do it, everybody else suffers. Everybody else suffers. You've got to perform your job. And the last thing is everybody understands the common goal. And so those three attributes really make Mission Control the really perfect example of teamwork. And I might say that one of our slogans at NASA in terms of this extreme teaming is that TEAM, team, stands for Together Everyone Achieves More. And that's just so true. I observe that on a daily basis there. And finally, I'll just close with one more team picture. Sometimes we work with outside entities. And so this company, Rocketdyne, was building the main engines that go on the back of the space shuttle. They're by far the most complicated part of the space shuttle. have about 40,000 pieces each. Each engine, like that one behind you, generates 12 million horsepower. And so the people that built that are part of our team. And you can see the flight crew there in the front. We would go visit them to make sure that any questions they had or concerns they had could be shared. So of course, that they could also meet us and understand that, we're actually the people that will fly on that machine. And so we developed this really, really close relationship. And because of that, we achieved a really, really big things. And so with that, I'll close and I'll hold off for a moment on making my concluding remarks. And I think now would be a good time to go to the chat and have some questions and answers. And so I hope you've thought a little bit about whether you would take the free ticket or not. It's always an interesting discussion if people change their mind along the way. And so from that, I'll go to the chat screen here. Would I go to Mars? Is a question from Michelle. For me, I would hesitate a little bit only because my children are now at an age where I want to see how their life develops. But let's talk about the difference between going to the moon and Mars. So the moon is 250,000 miles away, takes 3 days to get there. Mars is a much farther place away. It takes 9 months to get there and 9 months to come back. And so a round trip is 18 months, plus you want to stay there for a little time. So you're going to be on a spaceship for about a 2-year mission. And so that really raises a lot of different questions. What happens if someone gets sick along the way? What happens if one of their family members on Earth gets sick while you're up there? And so it's going to be a very difficult mission, but we will do it without a doubt. We're shooting for the mid next decade to the 2030s at NASA. I'm a firm believer that it will happen. I don't know that we'll ever send millions of people there, but I am certain that we will send explorers there. And by the way, there's a great series on right now on Netflix called Away, where there's a woman commander. And it's a 10-part series that I just watched, but it's about a group that goes to Mars. And so I probably wouldn't go, but I think there are a lot of people that would. Okay, another question from Aria. It's a question about the commercial companies. So for those of you who don't know, there's at least 3 companies now building spaceships as a private company. So these aren't government companies, these are private companies. So for example, SpaceX, Boeing, and Sierra Nevada are building spaceships, and also Virgin Galactic. And what their goal is to help the government space programs. So for example, SpaceX just flew a couple astronauts to the space station. Another company, by the way, Northrop Grumman, just flew cargo to the space station yesterday. But their ultimate goal is to provide trips into space for not just normal citizens, not government astronauts. And so you would buy a ticket to go into space. I am fully thrilled about it. I think 50 years from now, it'll be very common. Maybe even 30 years from now, it's going to be a little expensive at the beginning. But if we think back to the beginning of commercial aviation back in the early 1900s, 1920, 1930, going on a commercial airplane flight was really expensive. It was probably pretty dangerous, and not many people did it. Outside of the influence of COVID, now commercial aviation is very popular. And in fact, on most normal days, outside of the COVID period, we had 5,000 airplanes in the air at any time, and you could travel anywhere. I really think that decades from now, you'll be able to go onto the internet or whatever system we're using at the time to decide your travel plans and have going to the space station or Earth orbit or the moon as an option. So I'm really excited about what they're doing. One of the flights, by the way, Virgin Galactic, their flights don't go around the Earth like the other ones will. Theirs go up on like a ballistic flight for about 15, 20 minutes and then come back down. So that's a different option too. Let's see, a question from Jessa. What was your favorite thing to see on Earth from space? Thank you, Jessa, for asking that particular question because I didn't cover it. Seeing the Earth from space really changes your view on things. And that's because you see the big picture. And for me, it really did look like this little blue, beautiful blue marble in this vast black ocean. There's nothing nearby except the moon. It's this little rock that doesn't have much on it. But then the next thing is a long way away. So if you think about what it would look like from being way back far away, it looks like this little blue island in this vast black ocean. And if you see it that way, it really does influence the way you're thinking in 2 ways. And if you're interested in learning more, you can look up the overview effect on the internet, OVER, and then the word view, overview effect. For me, it was really manifested in two thoughts. The first is that the Earth is fragile. It's this little island. And if you live on an island, you need to take really good care of the island. So for me, it was increasing my awareness of the environment, increasing my interest in climate change and determining where we're headed with that. And so for me, it's we need to take care of the Earth because it's really our own place. There's really no plan B. We need to take care of the place we are. The second deep thought was that when you look at the Earth, you don't see any borders. And so it really does look like one global community. It really is one global community. We're all in this together. There's no other planet nearby. We're all in this together. And for that reason, I think astronauts are all also perplexed by conflict and war and really much more interested in promoting peace. To answer your specific question from space, two places really thrilled me. The first was Namibia, which is on the western coast of Africa. It's spectacular because as you fly over the Atlantic Ocean coming up on the coast of Africa, all of a sudden Namibia is there and they have these giant sand dunes, which I've never seen in person on the ground, which come right down the ocean. So you have this spectacular change in color from blue to this really beautiful brown sand, and also this change in texture. The other place that I was really thrilled with was the rooftop of the world, which is the Himalayas. It's absolutely spectacular, the northern part of India. Let's see, Tom asks, what were you part of after your astronaut career? Well, when we're astronauts, after we're flying, we help the people who are about to fly. One of my big assignments, though, was to help the European Space Agency build a spaceship that could bring cargo to the space station. So in that respect, I would bring my flight experience to the European Space Agency as they worked with the Russians to build this spaceship. For me, though, after I left NASA, which was about 4 years ago, I really felt a calling to spread the knowledge of what I had learned from being in space, awareness about the Earth, awareness about peace, and also passing on these thoughts about how you have these coaches along the way that teach you these amazing life skills that allows you to make great things happen. And I think you can probably feel my energy passing along that. Let's see, Greg asks, I've been to space 4 times. Do you still get nervous after going up a couple times? Did you keep calm under pressure when things went wrong in space? So it's really interesting, Greg, when I was in the spaceship the first time on the launch pad, I was not scared. And so that was really, really in some ways surprising. And it's probably surprising for all of you to hear because of course it's a very dangerous vehicle. But I stress again, the effort to have this meticulous preparation where you believe that anything that goes wrong, you can answer to was helpful. This amazing cohesion you've built within your team because you've become friends, right? Outside of work, working together and being givers and all that. You also have this sense that we will take on this challenge and do well. I think probably a little bit of it is, most of the things are out of your control at that point. I will say I was anxious, again, not out of fear that something bad would happen, but that frankly, I would make a mistake along the way. And also that, of course, my family would carry the burden of that mistake or even worse. And so it was kind of the same feeling for each flight. I will say that when you go up on the rocket the second or third time, you do appreciate it more and have a greater sense of what's going on. That's true in any event in life, right? Okay, question from Aiden. If you would have done one thing differently as a kid with respect to chasing a dream, what would it have been? Well, for me, Aiden, the key part that I was not allowed to pursue was the becoming a military pilot. And so for me, that was really disappointing. But I had to pivot and do something differently. In terms of any specific lessons, I think that there are so many things to do in life, especially when you're young and especially now in the kind of the social media day. There's so much information coming to you. I'll call it noise. There's so much information that sometimes something will distract you, like this bright, shiny object over here, and you'll miss something over here. And so I wish I had learned the lesson earlier to simplify my life. And so for those of you who, at any place in your life, it's really important, I think, to lead as simple life as you can, because there's a lot of noise out there and it's really important to focus on the important things. I encourage you for example, to always have a priority list in your mind. You don't have to write it down. Priority lists can change from moment to moment, day to day, but you've got to have that list in front of you in your mind so that when some shiny object comes in, you can decide if it goes on the list or not and where it does. And when two things are competing on the list, you can decide whether to, which one has higher priority. Okay, let's see, we'll take one last question. What's the one piece of advice that you would offer to everyone in these challenging times? For me, it's to keep the big picture. I really struggled the first month or two of the COVID period because nothing was in my control. And I'm sure that many of you felt that way. And of course, the time horizon was not known. But what I learned through the coaches that I had is just divide and conquer. Keep moving forward, keep a picture on what the big challenges at the end. So for example, the sacrifices that we have to make in order to not let the COVID spread farther. Those are really, really painful sometimes. And I'm tired of doing them, but I remember what the big picture is. The big picture is we're trying to defeat this monster. We're trying to defeat the effect it's had on our children's education and our economy and on the older people in our society. There's the ones that are really at risk. And so for me, it's easy to perform these tough things because I know what the long-term picture is. I also would like to add that it's really important, I think, during these tough times to take care of yourself, your physical well-being, get enough sleep, get enough exercise, eat well. In space, we have schedules that we follow them day by day, hour by hour to make sure that we take care of our system, our temple, our body. And so the first month or two, I did not have a schedule. I was kind of just wandering around day by day, not having a schedule, was missing workouts, was eating lunch at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of at noon. And so finally I realized I need to have a schedule. And so that kind of kicked everything back in. And on that schedule, you need to take care of your mental health, right? You need to have this spiritual strength. And, it's the 21st century. It's common now to make sure that we treat our spiritual health just like we treat the health of other parts of our bodies, like our skin, our eyes, our heart, and things like that. So, make sure that you take time to yourself. You need to do that once in a while. If you're in a constrained space with other people, give them their space when they need it. But man, if you need help, it's only a phone call away, or maybe it's a tap on the family member's shoulder or a friend, but take care of yourself. And with that, I'll just make a couple concluding comments. And that is, coaches are making people's lives better. I'm so grateful for the coaches I had because they helped me develop into a resilient person that set these gigantic goals. And despite getting kicked in the teeth along the way many times and having these great big setbacks, I had this skill set that they had taught me to help me pursue the big dream and make it successful. And so with that, I would remind you to keep thinking big and keep being resilient along the way. And to all the coaches out there, no matter what area you're coaching in, thank you so much for developing the younger people and making them great citizens in our culture and great contributors to society in the years ahead. And with that, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.